Want to welcome Travis Montembeault from Peerless and FireConnect to join us today. We had him on the fire protection podcast. When was that, Travis? In October?
Yeah, just over a month
Yeah,
ago.
yeah. So kind of prepping. This is more of a deep dive into FireConnect and kind of the future of smart fire protection and fire pumps. So wanted to bring you back since we had a lot of great feedback with that. Um, uh, like I was saying before, I start off my presentation with this slide every time, and luckily there's a nice. You said it's not a fire pump; it's just the engine.
It's
So,
the pump's on the other side, so we know what you're doing here. It's all good.
quick plug before we get started. If you don't know who Inspect Point is, yeah, obviously, please learn about us. But we're a fire protection, inspection, testing, and maintenance, and service field service software niche for the fire protection industry. Sprinklers, pumps, fire alarm, suppression systems, extinguishers, and we've got a lot going on within our platform. So learn about us more at inspectpoint.com, book a demo, talk to me, talk to the whole team. Um, Andrew Shockey from my team is on here as well to answer any questions. So down in the chat box, the Q&A, toss them out. We could either do those live or we can kind of queue them up as we go through. Travis is going to go through the presentation. If anybody has, if needs any CPDs for this, we are recording it and we can generate CPDs. Just reach out to marketing at inspectpoint.com and we can produce those certificates for whoever's in attendance. We're also recording this, so whoever did register for it will get a copy of the recording as well. Another plug, the podcast. I mean, Travis was on there, but we're doing a lot of fun stuff with the kind of the future of fire protection and what's going on with the industry. So like it, subscribe. We're trying to do one a month in 2023. If there's any topics, feel free to toss them my way on LinkedIn or just reach out to me at drew@inspectpoint.com. So enough about me, enough about us. Let me stop sharing and give Travis the host. So thanks, Travis, for being on again with us today here.
Yeah, Drew, my pleasure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Travis Montembeault. I am the Director of FireConnect here at Peerless Pump. Thanks for taking time this afternoon here to learn a little bit more about smart fire protection systems, smart fire pump systems, and really kind of a deep dive into to FireConnect specifically here. So we're going to go through kind of the an overview of the system, how it works, how it's connected, the data that you can get from it, things to look out for, use cases and value prop, and we'll also do a little bit of a live demo as well. Drew, I cannot see the chat from here. So as you guys are monitoring, if there's anything relevant, and feel free to interrupt me in the interim. Happy to answer questions, as we're going here. That's
yeah, I'll definitely monitor it, and I may throw questions at you as I've
sure.
kind of talked to some people and just have questions myself. So
perfect. Yeah, that sounds good. So let's jump right into it here. So I've got the agenda up here. So we'll cover FireConnect and, like I said, the data that we're pulling from it, a little bit of the hardware and the software variations that you may see. So, depending upon your system configuration, there's a couple different options there. We'll go through some case studies. We'll talk a little bit about, using data to improve loss prevention and emergency response. NFPA 20 and 25 both have some recent updates that really lend to remote monitoring and smart fire at this point here. And we'll do a live demo as well. So with that, what is FireConnect? And at the end of the day, it's really a combination of hardware and software, where the hardware enables a cloud-based user interface, remote monitoring that gives you a look into your fire pump system within your building. And it's important because you can look into that system without physically having to be into the building. COVID world, difficult to get access. Now it's from an employment standpoint, it's difficult to get technicians sometimes, or to get people into the building. Being able to have a look into your system to understand how it's acting without being there is becoming more and more critical. And for somebody that's responsible for multiple systems, especially over multiple geographical locations, that value kind of increases exponentially. But by taking the physical layer and bringing it to the digital layer, so the cloud-based component here, The end result is a smart wheel that we have on the right here. And we've got proactive system monitoring, which that, is always on, always looking at your system, being able to understand, how it's behaving, what condition changes there are. That is the root and the core of what we're doing here. And that then enables things like event notification. So being able to get a text message or an email when there is a condition change. So that time in between inspections, for example, when things change, right? Because an inspection is when we catch when something changes, there's a condition change. Knowing in between those inspections if something happens, the system is proactively telling you that, it's sending you a notification. It enables things like sustainability. So we'll talk a little bit about water savings. Monitoring of your weekly tests, so code compliance for running your required weekly or your monthly fire pump test, for example. Logging that information automatically as the test is running, being able to look back at that from a historical standpoint. So if you're required by your AHJ or your service provider and you need to send that information, that's all captured automatically. So you just share a PDF, send that to whomever is asking for that information, and boom, you're compliant effectively. Things like personnel time saving. So those of you that listen to the podcast, heard the Drew snip the phrase, why do I have to go look at a gauge? Why can't that gauge tell me what its value is, right? And so saving somebody from having to walk down a system every week to look at every single riser gauge as they're walking through their facility, and instead letting those risers tell them what their values are at any given time. The personnel time savings from that standpoint is immense. And finally, what we call incident command. So really, beyond the proactive piece, in the event of an incident, understanding how your fire pump is performing, if there's a fire, if there's an incident going on, is that fire spreading? Is it contained? Is the pump doing what it needs to be doing? Is the water supply sufficient? So being able to get that picture into the system without physically having to go into a building that, potentially is burning here. So that's kind of the overview of the high level of what FireConnect is. But this slide really, it shows what you would see within a fire pump room itself. So you see your diesel engine and your fire pump here. So Drew, you had your diesel engine picture. On the back side of that is the pump. In this case here, we've got the pump. That's usually connected, or that's always connected to a main fire pump controller, so a diesel or an electric driven controller. You've got a jockey pump system, so for your daily pressure maintenance, so your fire pump's not turning on and off, day in and day out. You've got that jockey pump there. You may have a water supply tank if you're not fed from a city supply. So, a lot of you in New York City, for example, you have, water supply tanks in the buildings. If it's diesel driven, there's a diesel fuel tank in there. And a lot of systems have, an approved flow meter for running your annual flow test, being able to run it through a flow meter loop, for example. That's, there's a lot of other components in there, but that's the crux of your pump room from, the most important critical components that are in there. What FireConnect is and what it does, it is the IoT output effectively for all of this information. So all of these components are basically data, data outputs. There's data coming out of the controllers. There's data you can gather from the pump, from the water storage tank, from the fuel level, for example, pump room temperature over here on the right. There's so much data there, and that all flows through FireConnect. So we've got this hardware piece, this FireConnect gateway controller that's in the middle. And so it's connecting to these controllers here via a Modbus connection. It's connecting to digital and analog inputs for other accessories here. And it's taking all of that data into this gateway controller. And we've got an IoT board within it. It's got a SIM card on it and a cellular connection. And it's sending that data up to the cloud. So you got the Peerless FireConnect cloud on the left over here. And that outputs to a user interface, so a web-based user interface or an iOS mobile app, for example. So just like your smart home apps, you can log in, you can see the status of your door lock, you can see the status of your garage door opener, your security system. You can go in there and see it. Now, we all know that we're not going to spend, every waking minute looking at those dashboards, looking at those apps. So we want to be alerted when there's condition changes. So that's where we talked about this SMS and notifications component comes in here. So if the pump room temperature drops to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, we take that input into the gateway and send it to the cloud, and we want it to send us a text message and say, hey, your pump room temp is low, or hey, your fuel level is low, or your water supply tank level is low. These types of outputs that you normally would only be able to see if you're physically in the fire pump room itself, boots on the ground in there. We want to be able to see that without having to get out of bed effectively. Look at the app, look at the text messages we get, and so take that information there.
I've got a question already.
Yep,
Travis.
go for it.
You got one, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but you have optional APIs up there. So obviously you have the text message, you have an email automation. Does that arrow go both ways or just outward?
Absolutely, it goes outwards. So we can take all of this data and we can send it to wherever is required, whether you want to integrate it into your building management system because you want to see specific components, whether you want to integrate it into an ITM platform like InspectPoint, for example. So we talk about that, reading that gauge value, for example, right? So we're monitoring suction pressure, we're monitoring jockey pump starts, we're monitoring system pressure. So when you're doing your weekly or your monthly walkthroughs, and you've got that ITM report, why do you have to walk to the pump room to look at the gauge to make sure you've got, sufficient suction pressure? Let that field already be completed in the ITM sheet. So that data can be sent outwards as well. And similarly, when we have, we got that arrow going inwards, we can take other smart fire components, and we'll touch on them a little bit when we do the walkthrough, such as, monitoring riser gauges or a smart hydrant in a loop, for example. And there's other ancillary hardware out there that we can pull in. So FireConnect becoming, effectively an Amazon Alexa of fire protection. So we don't sell gauge readers, we don't sell smart hydrants, other people do, but we can take that data via an API, just like how we can send it out to InspectPoint and aggregate it into one user interface.
That's interesting. So you can take other components, other IoT components, and push it through the gateway.
Absolutely, absolutely. And whether it comes through the gateway physically or we pick it up in the cloud layer via an API, both options are available to us.
Cool.
I guess a couple other notes on this system here. So I mentioned connecting to the fire pump controller, the jockey pump controller. These controllers are Modbus enabled and to give us the data that we need out of those fire pump controllers. So typically you're picking up, your core mandated dry contacts from your fire pump controller, phase failure, phase reversal, main switch off, whether it's electric or diesel. You're taking the 4 critical ones, and a lot of times they're picked up from through the building management system or a remote alarm panel, depending upon your jurisdiction. Now, those only tell you so much information, but within these fire pump controllers in electrics, there's at least 70 plus pieces of data that we can gather, and in diesels, there's 40 plus pieces of data. Each of those items of data would typically reflect as a common trouble or a system trouble alarm in your building. So the impact of that is I get a phone call at 2 a.m. and I'm the fire site leader, and somebody says, "Hey boss, I've got a system trouble alarm in the fire pump room. What do I do?" Usually that means you got to go into the pump room and look at the controller to physically see what's going on there. But by taking that Modbus data from those fire pump controllers and outputting it to the cloud, you could actually look in the app, and we'll show you a good case study of this here in a few minutes of what is driving that alarm. So then you can make, better decisions. Do I need to rush in? Do I need to call the fire department, or can I wait till the morning? So that's an important point. Not every fire pump controller is Modbus enabled, especially jockey pump controllers. They are typically fairly basic in nature. So a lot of times those would, need to be replaced or retrofit. So that's a consideration so that we can get that data out. But we'll talk to you just in a moment about some different opportunities that you may have here. So from a hardware standpoint, we showed you on that previous slide in the center, the FireConnect gateway controller, and that's your IoT brains of your system. That's how we get that data. That's all that data that's trapped in the 4 walls of the pump room. That's how we get it out. Cellular connection up to the cloud, so on and so forth. This gateway controller typically connects via Modbus to the main fire pump controller, and via Modbus to a jockey pump controller. Now, the jockey pump controllers, as I just mentioned, typically a lot of times don't have that Modbus option, or it's a retrofit, requirement. What Peerless did in an effort to simplify the installation and then also give retrofit customers a little bit of, opportunity for, some cost savings and maybe just dipping a toe into the smart connection world, we decided to take all the smarts from the FireConnect gateway controller and integrate them directly into the jockey controller. So giving you a secondary option or an alternative option from a hardware standpoint. So we took a standard jockey pump controller that's Modbus enabled, does its normal pressure maintenance. You set the pressure, the start and the stop, and it keeps the pressure up in your system just as it normally would in a fire protection, any type of fire pump system running day in and day out. But then we're capturing that data and we're sending it up to the cloud, just like we normally would with this gateway controller. And then we still take all those analog and those digital inputs. So that suction transducer, or the pump room temperature, or the flow meter, the water storage tank. We take all those inputs and we still connect it to the IoT board that's in this jockey controller and send all that up to the cloud as well. And this is important because we now have in an integrated package a kind of basic version of a smart fire pump system. And so we'll go one slide further here, because this enables two different user interfaces for us. And this is your first look at the UIs. So that FireConnect jockey controller will allow a retrofit customer to get a smart fire pump system by installing that jockey controller without upgrading or replacing their main fire pump controller. So we talked about being Modbus enabled for that main fire pump controller. If you've got a site, maybe your controller is 8 years old and it's still working fine, but it's not Modbus enabled, or maybe it can't be retrofit to be Modbus. We can still give you a big portion of smart systems based on that jockey controller and those inputs, and we connect to those 4 code mandated dry contacts from your main fire pump controller. So in this case, this is a diesel system. So pump running, system trouble, main switch not in auto, and pump room trouble. So we take those dry contacts and we can still send, alerts and signals and start to do things like monitoring tests from that. Drew, do you have a question?
I do. We've got a couple. Didn't want to interrupt you you're on a roll here.
No,
so back before you mentioned they're connected, both options are connected via data, 3G, 4G, 5G.
Yeah, so it's 4G LTE right now.
4G LTE. Okay,
yep.
That's good. I know IoT they got rid of 3G and
they sunset that.
Yeah,
so our original version was 3G, and then we did a SIM card swap effectively for any existing installations that needed to be upgraded to 4G.
And there's no Wi-Fi option right now. A lot of it due to probably security purposes.
Yeah,
right?
That's a great question. So it's good to address the reason for cellular. So there was an opportunity to either go Wi-Fi or networking through your LAN within your facility. But early on, after speaking to some of our pilot customers, we took the decision to go with a cellular connection, out of the gate from a security standpoint. So a lot of our, key account customers were concerned about connecting, smart systems behind their firewalls and potential for whether it's hacks or control or anything along those lines. So early days, we took the decision to go cellular. There was an HVAC hack that happened about 10 years ago where a pretty big box retailer, had a massive customer hack because somebody used the HVAC system that was connected, into behind their firewall effectively, and to, use that as their entry point. So that was really just from a security decision. And I think one other point to note real quick with that is we are viewing all this data, but we're not controlling anything. So we're not starting or stopping your pumps. We're taking snapshots into, a window into time. We're looking to see how the system is performing, but, we're not controlling anything here.
Yep, it's data gathering, not remote testing,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, no control here.
One question from Chris Rabondo. Can the gateway monitor any pump/controller, or is it specific to Peerless? I know you probably get to this, but
great question. Yeah, and we'll address it now, just as easy. So we call FireConnect pump agnostic. Yes, it's a Peerless pump product, but we can monitor any UL/FM fire pump. So it doesn't matter if it's our competition or our own, we'll monitor it. And similarly, we play with the majority of the main UL/FM fire pump controller manufacturers. So Tornatec, FireTroll, Master, and Eaton will connect to any of those via Modbus. We talk about this Sentry setup here. So we call it Sentry, which is when you don't have a Modbus enabled main fire pump controller. So we still have that more, some smart fire protection monitoring, but we don't have everything. That connection with those 4 dry alarm contacts we can pick up, other pump for other controller manufacturers as well there. But when we're using the Modbus connection, we play with those four main, I guess the heavies, if you will, in the industry here. And so that's a good segue into the difference between Sentry and Guardian. So Guardian means you've got a Modbus enabled main fire pump controller. So you're getting all that extra data. You're getting the 40 plus diesel data points. You're getting the 70 plus for electrics here. And the end result is a little bit of a different looking user interface, more notifications for Guardian versus less on Sentry, but you're still getting, you're still able to log your system tests with Sentry. You're still getting jockey pump data over time, that historical number. You're getting pump room temperature notifications and customizable alerts, even diesel fuel level monitoring you can pick up with Sentry. But Guardian really takes it a step further. So when you get that system trouble alarm, you're really able to dive into what's driving that there. But the beauty is if you're doing a retrofit and you start with Sentry because you don't want to replace your main controller yet, when you're ready to upgrade to Guardian, all you do is you add in that Modbus enabled main fire pump controller. So you replace your existing, and then you just connect an Ethernet cable between the main controller and the FireConnect jockey controller, the FCJC we call it. And now you can have a Guardian setup. It's that simple. Drew, any questions before I jump into?
No. Keep rolling. Yeah, this is great.
All right, perfect. So we'll use a couple of case studies to highlight, how we use the data and the value that it drives for you all, for customers, for end users, for sprinkler contractors, for AHJs, really where people can grab value. So we say that fire pump system monitoring, it's ensuring that your pump is always in a ready to perform, making sure that your pump is in a ready state to perform when you need it. And what we say is we're going beyond just the code mandated alarms. So you might get a standard alarm in the building, but what does that actually mean other than, hey, there's a problem? So getting an overview that, for example, your pump is on, that it's in auto and it's not turned off. And this is especially important if you've got a global portfolio of fire pumps, for example. If you're a multinational and you're responsible for life safety throughout all your facilities, just making sure that your pumps are ready to go when you need them to. Critical data, like making sure you've got adequate suction pressure so that pump, if it needs to turn on, will be fed accordingly. That your jockey pump, because that is the pump that runs day in and day out, is running, and that it's got power available, and then it's set to run. You've got the event log that you can see where that arrow is, that it's turning on and turning off as it needs to. Because if that's not working, anytime you've got a pressure drop in your system, which happens over time, because we know these systems will leak over time, your fire pump would be turning on every time. And those don't turn off automatically, and usually an alarm will go out. Sometimes the fire department will show up, so you want to avoid that. So making sure that the jockey pump is ready when it needs to. Talk about code compliance. So making sure that if you're running your weekly fire pump test, if you have a diesel, or your monthly for an electric, making sure that's run. We also plot that performance. So when you run your churn test weekly, we take that suction pressure and that system pressure, and we take the differential and we plot that against your factory curve. So this green curve is your factory curve, or it could be, if you want, we can load in your annual flow test curve. So it's based on, field performance versus factory performance. It doesn't matter, but we plot against that. So then you can export that data when it's requested of you. And it also keeps a log and a hierarchy here. So you can see somebody running basically their weekly test for this diesel setup once a week, and they can go back through the log here and pick whichever test they want to see. And
that's
finally,
nice. That's nice to push on an NFPA 25, annual potentially too, right?
Yes, exactly. And I'll show you in the demo. There is an option as well for.
Does it pull historical, like past years, right?
Yeah. So right now we don't have a stopgap in terms of historical data. So you set your filter, and you can see in the screenshot here, it says start date and end date. You can set that filter back as far as you need to. Nice. And pull your data, accordingly that you're looking for. Yeah. We talk about this global picture. So if you're a, life and safety or security for a large company, for example, and you're responsible for a site in West Virginia and a site in Ohio and a site in California, at any one time, like that is a lot to manage. So being able to get a quick look, you can log in every morning, for example, and get a quick overview, and the system will alert you, bubble up that information that you need to know when there's a challenge or a problem. So you see a lot of green circles on the screenshot here of of installations for one of our specific customers here. Then you see the orange triangle with the exclamation mark. You see another red exclamation mark there. Those are sites where there's some type of an alarm condition that needs to be looked at or addressed. So you quickly can get a picture of, okay, across my entire portfolio of all my fire pumps, here are the sites where I need to spend my attention this morning. Maybe pick up the phone, ask what's going on. Hey, are you looking into this? All with the goal of getting proactive versus reactive here.
Cool. Hey, Travis, got two questions.
Go for it.
Not pertaining to this, but one from Jim. Is the pump performance adjusted for speed when
Yeah, so
plotting
that,
against the shop test?
great question. So that's why we actually prefer to load in the field test curve as opposed to the, we're not using attack right now, like to actually look at live speed. So what we're doing is if we use the field test curve, that is in essence the field performance that you're looking at, and then we can use that as our barometer for comparison as opposed to the factory curve.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Another one from Chris here. Assuming the control panel is accessed through the account with FireConnect, and that one account can monitor numerous systems, can the contractor access the systems with the customer? So
Yes,
and there's another question kind of pertaining to that. Who owns the FireConnect? Is it the end user, the contractor, is it a combination? I guess
yeah.
kind of explain that a little bit.
So there's multiple opportunities here. So if an end user decides to buy FireConnect, then obviously they own the FireConnect system and the inputs that go with it. But they can also choose to share that information. So if they sub out all of their fire protection maintenance or their testing or their inspections to a specific contractor, they can give that contractor access as well. They can bless that. On the flip
Great.
side, if I'm a contractor that provides annual service or weekly walk downs and testing, I could just as soon sell FireConnect as part of my service portfolio or my service package offering and say, hey, if you install this piece of hardware there, it's going to give you X, Y, and Z value props here. It's going to save everybody time. It's going to save you money. We're going to be able to get ahead of events. And then they would be able to give the end user access as well. So really it's at that point of sale of who's kind of got the control there. But we've got plenty of examples where like some of our business partners also have access to end user sites as well. And they check in and say, hey, just seeing what's going on. And I see your jockey pumps running quite a bit, for example, kind of checking in from there.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
And so that's a good segue. So jockey pump, that's a good segue into what I want to talk about here real quick. So one of the things we've learned with FireConnect by looking at all this data, crunching all this data that we see in fire pump rooms, because for the longest time, we knew there was plenty of information there, but we had a good way of getting it out and analyzing it. And this is probably obvious to some of the seasoned veterans in the fire protection world here, but since the jockey pump is the item that runs basically constantly in a fire protection system, especially compared to your fire pump, which only runs for a weekly or monthly test unless there's a fire. That jockey pump gives you a really good picture of system health, and changes to jockey pump, performance over time really gives you an indication of when things can change within your system as well. So if I break an elbow or a pipe bursts or usually if a sprinkler head opens, it's enough of a pressure drop for your fire pump to open, but some type of significant drop in the system where you're losing a lot of water in the system, you'll start to see more frequent jockey pump starts. So that jockey pump over time will turn on more frequently and may run for longer periods of time. And that gives you an indicator that there's a problem. So by FireConnect monitoring your jockey pump system, it's actually really monitoring the overall health of your system as well here. And so we can do things like set an alert. So if we know your jockey pump starts 25 times per day on average, we can set a threshold that says, send me a text message if it starts 35 times in a 24-hour period. And then you get an indicator that something may be changing here. And that becomes important when you start to look at 1-year performance charts like this. Each bar, vertical bar, is a 24-hour period of starts. So this site, had 200, 300 site starts per day. They tightened their system up in June of 2020, and they went down to 10, 15 starts per day. And then they had a leak that really happened around late November, early December. Starts went up again each day. And this is important. We talk about the sustainability piece. A lot of this information goes unknown. we don't really look at the jockey pump unless someone's physically standing in the pump room typically and looking at the counter or has a stopwatch and sees how many times it turns on in a 20-minute period. We're not really paying attention to it. So we're not necessarily knowing when issues may pop up. Being able to send a text message when your jockey's starting more than it normally does is a leading indicator that an issue is starting to crop up here. But I think maybe even more importantly, taking this data, especially as a site leader, for example, or as a contractor, and saying, hey, you've got a real problem here. Your underground's leaking, or you got valves leaking everywhere. Using this as a business case effectively for CapEx to spend the money to improve your system, that can drive this. And we saw this as an example with one of our business partners. They use this exact data to drive a business case for CapEx, and now they're saving 1 million gallons of water per year. So a guy that runs the factory also has a feather in his cap for saying, hey, I just found 1 million gallons of water a year. So you bring in, sustainability goals, environmental and sustainability goals here. Yeah, it's a big factory and maybe 1 million gallons of water isn't a ton in the scheme of things in terms of how much they're using, but it's not insignificant. And then it also points to a better, tighter fire protection system. So, I mean, using the Peerless factory as an example, we put a new loop in within our facility a couple of years ago, and now it makes for actually a really boring system to look at in terms of FireConnect, because our jockey pump runs like twice a day, maybe. So it's a really tight system, but at the time it was running, it could run 100 times a day, no problem. These old loops, they just tend to leak, especially these valves around the loops. Okay, so a couple other cases here, and we'll go a little bit quicker because I do want to get to the demo. Monitoring pump room temperature, for example. So sending an alert when pump room temp drops below a threshold that you specify. So fire pump controllers today have pump room temp monitoring, but it comes through in as alarm. And unless you have the extra contact specified and then wired to your remote alarm panel, you don't know what that root cause is and what's driving that. This specific site was an unmonitored construction site over a holiday weekend, and this fire pump house was providing temporary fire protection for the construction site. It was like a winter day, gusting winds, and the doors to the pump house blew open, and the fire site leader, who was home on a Saturday, gets a text message and says, the system says, hey, your pump room is down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So he gets in his truck, drives on site, realizes the doors are open and the heater couldn't keep up in the pump room. So he closes the doors, temp rises, and he saves the system, because we all know freezing temperatures are just not good for fire pump systems. Cracked pipe, cracked pumps, could be $100,000 in damages just to that equipment alone in the pump house. But then you start to think of the real cost of, well, what would that mean for the construction if this was providing temporary fire protection for that site if they weren't able to operate? And what would the implications of that be? So this system paid for itself, 3-4 weeks into being installed effectively, because he couldn't be there 24/7 on a Saturday to look for the alarm, but the system told him when there was an issue there. So we're trying to get proactive and avoid some of these major, these situations before they become major situations. So we're trying to head them off. 2 more. So we call this, instead of calling the fire department, call the diesel fuel delivery truck. And this all comes back to, what does your common trouble or your system trouble alarm mean? Because that's what you get through your fire alarm panel, your remote alarm panel, through your BMS system or central monitoring. 2 a.m, fire site leader, you get a call, boss, common trouble alarm, what do I do? So either go on site, see what's driving it, look at the control panel, and then make a decision. Or if you have FireConnect, you roll over, you say, hang on, let me call you back. And you get on your phone and you look in the app and you see, okay, there's a common trouble alarm, but I also have a fuel tank level low alarm. And that's what's driving the common trouble. So it's not critical. I don't need to go on site, right this second. When I get in tomorrow morning, I'll place a work order for diesel fuel delivery, and that will, clear that common trouble alarm effectively. So the goal is that we're trying to reduce visits to critical and urgent items. And if you think about this from a servicing contractor perspective, hey, I've got a common trouble alarm. There's something wrong with my pump. I don't know what the deal is. First thing you have to do is roll out there, assess what the situation is, and then you come up with a plan to fix it. So you probably got to go out and maybe go buy another battery or call a controller manufacturer and get new chargers if you got a charge problem, whatever. Point is you can reduce those visits if you know ahead of time what the actual situation is. And so this is that data that you get from a Modbus enabled fire pump controller. We get the fuel tank level low, the ECM warnings, and the high oil, the low oil pressure and the high fuel tank level, and all those alarms that typically would present as a common trouble alarm.
Travis, I actually
Yep.
did that. Installed a fuel level and just regular heating oil, right?
Yeah.
Where a few times I ran out of fuel, didn't have heat for the house, but I put an IoT sensor in, and essentially it actually automatically orders it for you too.
Yeah, and that's a future state for where we want to take fire protection monitoring, fire pump monitoring, is being able to monitor that performance data. So your weekly and your monthly tests, for example, seeing if there's degradation over time of that pump and saying, hey, time to order a repack kit or a minor repair kit, or here's the recommended spares for your diesel engine after 2 years, or hey, your jockey pumps now run 200,000 times. It's probably time to put one on the shelf because at some point it's likely that you'll have a failure, for example. The system, as it takes in this data and analyzes it, will be able to get smarter and be able to make those recommendations so that we can get proactive. And I think that's an important item to mention, is that for years, NFPA has known that there is so much data and information in these fire pump rooms, but it's been untapped. And now with tools like FireConnect, we can actually tap that and act upon it, thus improving reliability and safety effectively.
And the code.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So last case study, smarter decision making during a fire incident. So FireConnect has a tool that we call Incident Command. And what that is if that fire pump is running, we are telling you how that pump is performing. So we're monitoring flow from that fire pump, whether it's using an ultrasonic flow meter, so a piece of hardware, or it's monitoring using what we call estimated flow by looking at the difference in pressure against your pump curve. We're able to tell you how much flow is coming through that fire pump. And that's important during a live event, because as you're opening sprinklers, your demand for that system is increasing. And so the fire pump is flowing additional water over time. And if you're looking over time, so this chart shows you here, time on the x-axis and flow on the y-axis. It begins to look like stair steps over time. So sprinkler head opens, flow jumps up, then over time it's flat because you've only got the one head open. All of a sudden another head opens up. So flow jumps again and again and again. But what happens once that fire is contained? You're no longer opening sprinkler heads, but the pump's still on. You're still flowing water, but over time that flow rate is constant. So you see that plateau here. So you see that plateau on, that long plateau on this chart. That's indicative of hopefully a fire that's under control. What we're trying to do for the fire site leaders, for the incident commanders, for the emergency responders, is give them the data that they haven't had before, which is the pump running as it should? Does it have adequate supply? What is it flowing at? Does it still have more to give based on the rating of that fire pump? And what is the current performance? And they can take all that information and make a decision. And for me, hopefully that decision is they leave the fire pump on, because that's step one. Let it do its job. It was specified and designed for a specific feature. It's doing what it needs to do. Let it continue to operate here. But they can make decisions before they send somebody into the building to assess based on that performance. If they see this long plateau over time, by the time they arrive, they can probably make some assumptions here. They got to be careful because they still are assumptions, right? But they can look at using data, make some decisions that say, hey, this pump looks to have contained this fire at this point here. The sprinkler system, the suppression system appears to have suppressed this system, this fire, excuse me. So that's what Incident Command can really tell you. So this is really just in summary, using data to improve loss prevention and emergency response. So talked about understanding your risk level across all the sites, identifying leak issues and proactive maintenance. So Drew, that was a good question you asked, and especially where we want to see this heading, getting, a little bit more automated in work orders and parts and things like that. Incident Command, giving you real performance data during a live event. It's improving your decision-making as it's happening. And additionally, ensuring code and compliance. So you're running your weekly and your monthly tests and helping from a data management standpoint. So no longer do you have to have the clipboard hanging on the pump that tells you, hey, here's the test from last week with the check mark. That's now, digitized effectively.
Yeah, where I'd love to see this happen, where if, you know, and we're going to be working together on potentially in connecting this, right, and grabbing some of that data into Inspect Point, but automating those work orders out to the technicians to do whatever, right? But
Right.
there's different thresholds that you want to do, and it all depends on the service provider or the facility utilizing the platform. So yeah, I think there's some really cool stuff that we're on the brink of, and yeah, let's see this demo. That's why I think
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
everybody's
So there's a
excited.
few extra slides there, and we can make some slides available as well here. But I do want to get to the demo here. So this is a live site, a live customer site right now. So you're taking a peek into somebody's pump room from wherever you are at in the world, at this site here in the United States. We see current pump room temperature there. It's almost 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Live suction pressure, discharge. We've got the event log of when their jockey pump was running. But this event log picks up basically anything from the fire pump controllers. So I can go through and say, all right, I don't necessarily, I want to see just jockey pump, for example, and refresh. Or I can expand the filter here by a month, and then I can look through and say, all right, show me when your diesel fire pump has run. So when you've run your weekly test. Hopefully I didn't hang it up here for a second, but just bear with us. While that's spinning, so you can see on this snapshot page here still, we've got suction pressure and discharge pressure, the event log, but on the sides here, you've got the core alarms that you pull out of the main fire pump controller. So engine running, main switch and auto versus off, and auto shutdown disabled. And then you've got jockey pump data, so power available and auto here. And then at the bottom, you can see your starts over time. So this jockey pump started 140 times today, 255 before that, 251 before that. So you get a little bit of a picture into that window here. And if you zoom out a little bit over time, you can see different performance of that jockey pump. So we're talking about looking at system health, for example. This is a really good indicator on the snapshot page of what's going on. Back to this event log, I opened the filter a little bit so we can see what's going, what other alarms we've received, for example, or what other conditions we've received. So say I just want to see, all right, when did we run our fire pump here? Engine stopped and engine running. Now you can see the dates and the times here. Now this isn't the only place you can see it, and we'll log these as tests. And so we'll show that in just a second here, but it's important that this is the first page you see when you're looking through here. And I think an important piece, Drew, to mention, we talk about APIs and sending data out. We can send any of this out, obviously with the approval of the end user, what they want to see, what they're willing to send out. But this can go to an inspection platform if you need it to. So if you're running down your weekly test and you got to check, you got to mark off suction pressure and pump room temp, for example, that's already done for you effectively.
Any thoughts about when turning on a camera when it starts?
Yeah. So the piece that the piece that is probably missing from out of this is the ear, the nose, and the eye test effectively of somebody in the room still. So
Oh
when
yeah.
we start to talk about things like remote testing, remote monitoring, because fire pump controllers right now, you can schedule your automated test. So you can, in that controller, you can say, all right, start a weekly test for this diesel at this time every week. And if all things are okay, automatically shut it down after that 30-minute test. It's because it remains in a test condition. That's okay to do. Code will allow for that. Code is being updated though. So NFPA 25 says right now that somebody has to address an issue within 5 minutes, which means that somebody needs to be there on site. Next year, that's changing to 4 hours, which means that somebody doesn't necessarily need to be there right away, but they need to be able to get there. So things like remote monitoring opens up that potential in that avenue, but it still doesn't replace the ears, the nose, and the eyes test. So adding a thing like a camera, we see as the next logical step. For example, being able to look physically for any leaks. If you could do something like heat mapping, for example, and looking at bearing temps. That's stuff that we want to take this even further to really allow for somebody to maybe turn that pump on and go do something else because everybody's really busy, right? So walk down the rest of the facility while the pump's running and running its weekly test. And then if a condition pops up, they get a text message and they go running back to the facility, right? But
Yeah,
logging all that data effectively.
yeah, and and all the smart fire protection isn't getting rid of the physical fitter technician at the pump, right, or at any system, but it's
Right.
providing the data to, and a lot of NFPA 25 and just NFPA in general, like a lot of frequencies of why things are done have been kind of picked out of the air over the years, right? There was no data against it. Now, over the last 5 to 10 years, there has been, and this is, the more this is. I actually just answered Terry Victor's email from JCI about analyzing NFPA 25 data for the industry to kind of question, are we at the right frequencies?
Yeah.
When do physical people need to be there? Obviously, on the annual, that's not going away anytime soon, if ever. But those churn tests and no flow tests, there's some there's some neat stuff coming, right?
Well, especially by being able to crunch this data now that it's available, we can make more informed decision in terms of what do we actually need to look for? What is
Right,
actually an issue versus what is something maybe somebody thought a while back was an issue, so they put it on a checklist, for
right.
example. Right?
Yep.
We can start to look at what those failure points are. So that NFPA 25 checklist, and it was on the PowerPoint, but I wanted to get to the demo, but we show that weekly checklist that's 2 pages. And already over 50% of those items on that checklist, FireConnect automates. So you get that information without even having to step foot into the pump room. Some of that, that ear, nose, and eye test stuff that's still critical to that checklist, that's what we're not, picking up yet. So adding things like a camera, becomes a no-brainer as we're moving forward. And then using that data, crunching that data to, NFPA will make decisions based on information and data that they have that says, all right, well, maybe we don't need to check for that, or, oh, actually, we're not checking for this. Maybe we need to check this more frequently, right? So they're becoming a little bit smarter about how they're looking for it. But to your point, you're not replacing the guy on the ground. He's got to be there. He or she has to be there to assess and to fix, right? And to be there in case things go sideways. So as part of the demo, actually, let me go back to the main pump for 1 second here. So we talk about this Modbus enabled controller versus a non-Modbus enabled controller, and you pick up all these additional data points here. And these are all alertable. So if I want to get a text message, if my engine coolant temp is high, I click where the LED is here, and I set a condition based on it being high, that LED turning on, and say, send me a text message. And if I'm out on vacation, I can say, if I don't answer this text in 30 minutes, send it to this next person. So these types of things, you can build in redundancy, you can build in notifications and customize it however you need to. You can add as many users as you want to your facility. The opportunities here are effectively endless for what you can monitor, but a lot of this is all pulled from that Modbus controller there. We talk about jockey pump monitoring. So one of the things is daily starts. So I can say, hey, send me a text message if, last start was, 100 starts over here. Send me a text message if it goes to 120. So I change that to 120, select the users, and anytime it jumps up, we'd be getting text. And in this case, we'd probably be getting a good amount of text here. System test, and we'll be somewhat brief on this one here. Although I think, oh no, I didn't lock it up. It was just a pretty wide range here. So I can check based on my weekly tests, and I can go through and pick a test here, and we log that information, that data, that performance over the factory curve or your field test curve, your annual field test curve, and we log your pressure data and your flow data here based on what we're seeing from the system. So now you can export this curve and say, hey, I ran my test on this date. It ran for 30 minutes or plus, however long it did. Here's the curve, and you're off and running effectively from that standpoint. So you're talking about data logging there. One of the other things we didn't really touch on is over here, we've got a listed flow test. So if you have that flow meter loop in your pump room and you don't want to run through, you don't want to flow water through a hose header, you can use a digital flow meter, and we can take that digital signal from that flow meter, and same deal, we'll capture that data directly into the digital, from that digital flow meter, plot it against your curve here, and output it effectively for your annual flow test. So now you can have one person running a test instead of two. It really improves your efficiency from that standpoint here. And just from an output standpoint, we have the curves down here that are available. So as you choose your curve, hey, I need to see my test from November 11th. You can select it. We've got pre-configurable fields all around here, data standpoint, battery voltage, and you can check the boxes to say, okay, the voltage was okay. I checked, I checked oil level and oil pressure. Those were okay. So those visual indicators that people are doing when they're on site, for example, check those boxes, and then you can output right there as well. And same deal, Drew, this data as well could be sent to an ITM platform like InspectPoint. And so when you're doing that test, these fields all pre-populate. So you're simplifying that inspection for whomever's doing that inspection effectively.
Yep. Now some of the electrical data is grabbed as well, so you don't have to open the controller, right?
That's
so
a big thing, right? So we haven't looked at it.
safety.
We're looking basically at diesels right now, but pulling up voltage and amps and everything like that, that's all live. That's all in the app. So you don't have to open that controller or even look at the front of that controller, for example, to pull that.
Right.
This is the incident command page. It's not live right now. There was a flow blip on the last flow test here, so up to 4,100 GPM for a brief period of time, and then they shut the pump off. So we were able to capture this live while looking at your storage tank. So in the event of an incident, you would go to this page, you would see your discharge pressure and your suction pressure, you'd see the flow of the pump here, and the output on the graph. I just want to quickly, and I know we're running short on time, I want to quickly jump to the difference real quick between the Sentry template and the Guardian template. So we've just been looking at the Guardian template, which is a Modbus enabled main fire pump controller. But if you want the simplified retrofit option out of the gate without replacing your main fire pump controller, you just buy that FireConnect jockey controller, and you've already got a smart system off and running here. So we give you suction pressure and system pressure. We load in your pump curve, and based on the difference of what's happening here, if the pump is running, so we log that pump running signal from that dry contact. So when that pump turns on, we get that signal. We can plot against your factory curve or your annual flow test curve what that difference in pressure is, and give you a flow estimate here. Additionally, we've got the event log like you normally see. We've got the jockey pump log, and this is the demo one here in the office, which we've got on and off, but you would see over time, your different flow rates or your different, amounts of jockey starts effectively. So you're still getting that. And one of the features that we've added to this is giving you an estimate of how much water you're actually flowing through that jockey pump each day. So we've got the orange here is your daily starts, and the blue is the amount of GPM basically in a 24-hour period. So based on the rating of that jockey pump, how long it's run that day, will give you a rough estimate of how much water is actually flowing through there. So if you're trying to put numbers to an issue, this is a good way to do it. And then just the last thing on Sentry here, we did add this functionality for monitoring diesel fuel level. So, and it's alertable. So if you got a diesel fuel tank, we'll tell you not only if you're high or low, but how much you've actually got in that tank. So when you're looking at, do I need to order fuel? How much fuel do I need to order? I'm only halfway out of the tank. All right, that means I need to get 200 gallons, for example, like that. And if you care about, or if you have to care about, emissions reporting. So if you're in California, for example, we give you the daily runtime as well, based on when you run that, how long you run that fire pump for. So 35 minutes it's run today, for example. You can then use that to fill out your forms that you're required to do per state requirements in California. So we're trying to simplify from an emission standpoint some of the reporting that also has to happen here. But this is functionality that, as FireConnect iterates, we make available to everybody. So it's not like you're paying for this additional functionality for monitoring jockey flow or for emissions reporting data and things like that. As we add these items, it's rolled out to everybody's sites, and they can use them as they need to.
It's the best part about software, Travis.
It's so iterative. It's so different than this idea of Peerless is a really good fire pump manufacturer, and we've been doing it for almost 99 and a half years now. We've been making pumps. But pumps are static in a way from a development standpoint. Once you do the product development and you build one, like that's the product. There's not a lot of iteration on that, right? You come up with a new design and something more efficient, but this is iterative and it's constantly improving. And as we get feedback from the field, from customers, from users, to say, hey, I want to see, how long my pump's running so that I can report out to California on emissions data. We say, okay, we can turn that on for you. And over a weekend, that's basically turned on. Nice. So there's a lot of possibilities there.
Hey, question from the audience, from Jim. Can you estimate with a PLD controlled diesel driven fire pump?
Yes, yeah, we for sure can. So when you say estimate, though, I'm guessing you're talking about estimated flow. Is that?
Yes, estimated flow. Sorry. Yes.
So the only challenge with estimated flow and is a variable speed is then we're losing that RPM component. So then we're not running at a fixed speed. So then the calculation for estimated flow itself is off. One of the options we do have, though, is a hardware option, which is a clamp-on ultrasonic flow meter. So it's non-invasive, it's easy to install, and that will give you your flow rate as well. And we pick that up through a signal in the pump room into the gateway. So that would be an alternate option using the PLD.
Nice. I know we only got a few minutes left.
Yeah, I apologize for running time. So fire off.
Oh, no, you're good. Yeah, fire away with any more questions. I have a question while if there's any more questions out there, please feel to type it in, or we can have it go live. But so back to kind of my similar question before. So you have owners, building owners, facility managers that could definitely utilize this. We also have fire protection, fire sprinkler, fire pump contractors, service providers that could utilize this. Where obviously on the owner side, that's pretty simple, right? They get it installed. They have different contractors come in, and if they want to look at it, great. If they want to have it internal, I think that's perfect. It's pretty simple. But for a contractor, they're installing this gateway, right? Who owns that gateway? Who owns the FireConnect subscription? Is it the contractor? Is it the owner? Yeah. Right? Where do we get there? Because I could see, probably majority of fire pumps that are installed, they want a third party to come in and deal with it. So absolutely. I guess who owns that piece?
It just depends who sells that piece, or who buys that piece. So if the sprinkler contractor buys it and is installing it on behalf of an end user, it just depends. So is the end user wanting to take ownership of that piece of equipment because it's now in the building? That is up to the contractor and the end user at the end of the day. If, say, the contractor says, hey, I've got this monitoring option and I'm going to use it as part of our service agreement, I'm going to put it into your building, but I will own it at the end of the day, then I think it's pretty straightforward that sprinkler contractor would own it. I think it has to be an agreement between the end user and the contractor, depending upon what the goals are. If it's being brought from the bottom up, from the contractor up to the end user, saying, hey, I want to use this to monitor your system and it's going to be part of this package, then I think that's pretty straightforward. And similarly, top down, if the end user says, hey, it's important to us that we have this data and this information that it's logged, and we want you to monitor it, we'll take ownership of it, we'll buy the equipment, which is kind of the model we've seen thus far at this point. But we want you to keep an eye on it for us. Then, that's a different agreement between the end user and the contractor there. And so typically we build the end user for, there's an annual recurring subscription for that service, basically. So to be able to use the user interface, and that's typically come through the end user, but it is possible to also come via the contractor.
Yeah. I see a lot of potential on the contracting side.
I think so as well, especially when you're service minded and you're already in there doing inspection and testing. For a contractor, it's just going to drive efficiencies for their own business.
Who owns the data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, Peerless, as it's on its Peerless servers, we have ownership of the data. Now there are instances where we have discussions or agreements, or there's obviously Europe data privacy laws that we have to take into account, but that's all handled basically on a case-by-case basis. So as we're providing the equipment, we're hosting the servers, we're taking ownership of the data from that standpoint there. But of course, it's all available for based on request or whatever direction needs to be taken from.
Gotcha. A few more here. How many users can log in at the same time?
Yep. So unlimited. We haven't crashed the system yet. And similarly, if you are say you've got you're a corporation, you've got 100 sites all over the world, and you're one person that's responsible for 100 sites, you can see all 100 sites. But then you have an individual fire site leader that's responsible at Indianapolis, and you've got one in Columbus. That one in Columbus can only look at the Columbus ones if you want to set it up that way, just to help cut out the noise. So you can set up a hierarchy there. But similarly, that Columbus site can have as many users on there as you need to set up effectively.
Gotcha. Yeah. Raj is asking approximate cost. I guess you have the 2 gateways, and then monthly or annual cost for monitoring. And
Right.
I guess that's a subscription, right, to FireConnect.
Correct. Yeah. So there's the upfront capital cost, and then there is the annual subscription cost as well for the ongoing monitoring piece. So using that user interface and getting those unlimited notifications and things like that. The CapEx cost it's a little bit difficult to estimate because of the nuances with the main fire pump controllers. So whether you've got an electric or a diesel, the FireConnect jockey controller is, depending upon configurations, is roughly $4,500 to $5,000 all in. And then the annual monitoring fee is anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000, again, based on number of unit volume and configuration effectively here. So everything's still a little bit at an enterprise level. Reach out to us or reach out to our business partners, and we'll for sure be able to get you, squared away based on whatever the configurations of your system are. You'll need to take into account things like your diesel fire pump controller or your main electric fire pump controller if you want that Guardian setup. So we'll look at, based on the serial number, we'll reach out to whoever manufactured that controller, and we'll understand if it can be Modbus capable, if it already is, or if it can be retrofit, or if it needs to be replaced.
Cool. And last one, Chris Rabondo. I guess he couldn't find a spec or an installation manual for this. So if I don't know, he didn't see it on the website. But you guys have, is it FireConnect.com now?
Yeah, it's through the Peerless Pump website. So it's a subpage within peerlesspump.com. Okay. And we can make that, tie something to the LinkedIn post as well there, Drew. But the IOM is available, and there is a typical specification as well.
Is it just FireConnect.com?
Great question. No, that won't take you directly to it.
I was going to put it right in the chat, but
so
actually, if you have it, toss it right in the chat.
I'm putting it in right now.
While Travis does that, we'll kind of wrap this up. Again, thanks for everybody attending. If there's any other quick questions, speak now, or we'll get this out. We're recording it, so if there's any CPDs that are needed, feel free to reach out to marketing@inspectpoint.com. And yeah, really. Oh, there we go. Is it possible to hide data for certain users?
Good question. We can turn on and turn off specific components of the user interface as required. To what end? I guess it kind of depends on what the end result or what the goal is effectively. So all the data is there, but it's the output to the user interface that is what we can control effectively.
Cool. Well,
I just put the link in the chat there as well.
Perfect.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Travis. This is great. Yeah, and I think there's going to be some stuff coming with us in 23. Grabbing some of this data, put it optimizing for NFPA 25 would be huge. So if you are an InspectPoint user out there, there'll be some fun stuff here in the next coming year, I guess. Might take a little bit. But yeah, thanks again.
Drew, thanks for having me. Everyone, thank you for joining, and please feel free to reach out to the team, whether it's through LinkedIn. You can send a request in for information through the peerlesspump.com website. We've got business partners all over the world as well. So, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help. So thanks again for the time.
Thanks, Travis.
Thanks, everybody.